In this video, I'm going to be speaking as a private citizen, one who has the free right to express his mind and to express his heart. I'm going to be using my First Amendment rights to declare what I believe to be true, and so I'm not going to be representing necessarily my church or any of my employers or my publishers or anything like that. I'm just speaking as a man who is a citizen of the United States of America, and to be completely honest, one who is fairly outraged at some of the things that I see in the world around us today. And so in this video, what I'm going to try to do is discuss a number of reasons why I would certainly not be voting for Kamala Harris in the upcoming election. I've got about 30 reasons or so. I'm going to try to do these as quickly as I can. And I wondered, because I have so many reasons why I think this would be a terrible candidate for President of the United States, how I should order and structure my argument here. And so I thought the best thing to do is probably just to work through my concerns in alphabetical order. So let's start here with my first reason here, and probably one of my most important, if we're completely honest, and that is abortion. I have very rarely seen a candidate that loves abortion more than Kamala Harris seems to love abortion. The Democratic Party that exists today has shifted strongly to the left in recent years. It used to be that the Democratic Party was pro-choice, that they were those who would be arguing that abortion should be rare and safe and legal. That was essentially their position. Interestingly, the Republican Party, unfortunately, from my view, is moving into that space, but the Democrats have gone even further to the extreme left, if that's possible. The Democrats seem to absolutely love what abortion is. Now, I think most people, even if they tend to be pro-choice, which I am not, I would be considered an abortion abolitionist, very strongly pro-life, whatever term you want to use to describe that. I believe that abortion is a sin and that it's morally wrong. But the Democrats have moved so far to the extreme on abortion that it seems that they actually love it. They've become something of a party of death. And it's almost hard to find anything that Kamala Harris is for, other than that we certainly know she is certainly for abortion. And almost every speech she talks about abortion, it's hard to imagine somebody who loves this kind of death as much as Kamala Harris loves this kind of death. Even reasonable people should admit, I think, that abortion is sin, that it's wrong, that it's hurtful, that it destroys a life. But the Democratic Party has nevertheless shifted so far that they actually seem to love it like it's some sort of treasured sacrament to them. And not only that, but secondly, I can't seem to find any limit to Kamala Harris or the modern Democratic Party's love for abortion. In other words, at what point would they argue that abortion would become immoral? Is there any point? Would it be 9 months? Would it be 8 months? Would it be 8.5? Would it be full term? Would it be after birth? The Democrats just aren't clear on that. And so my assumption is that Kamala Harris supports all abortions all the time without any qualification or limit whatsoever. And I think even, again, most reasonable people would be outraged by something like partial birth abortion or 9-month abortion or infanticide. But I can't seem to find the outer limits of Kamala Harris's position on this. And so I am assuming the worst, and therefore I think she would be a very immoral and even evil leader for that particular reason. Next, Afghanistan. Our withdrawal from Afghanistan was easily one of the most, the worst military debacles that this country has ever experienced. Now, the United States of America has seen its fair share of conflicts, both global and international, but as much as I was glad to see these sort of forever wars come to an end, the way that we ended in Afghanistan was completely a debacle. We lost many lives, and unfortunately we gave over millions, if not billions of dollars worth of military equipment to the hands of our enemies. Any number of military technologies were compromised, and Kamala Harris seems to have very little shame about what happened in Afghanistan. Easily one of the worst and lowest moments in American military history. Next, Kamala Harris was straight up deceitful about Biden's health. Interestingly, she made a play for the nominee of the Democratic Party because of Biden's health, and yet she never ever once told us that his health was in any way compromised. She was never honest with the American people up until the point in which it was impossible to cover up this lie anymore. Kamala Harris went with the stated program, which is to say that Biden was totally fine. He was completely in cognition. His mental faculties were strong, if not excellent, and she never even acknowledged the fact that he was experiencing mental or cognitive breakdown. Even to this day, her recent interview, which was taped, unfortunately, she still denied that she was aware of anything. And anybody who would have been aware of Biden's mental decline would have been those who were in the inner circle. Obviously, he was protected from the public and from the press. But you would think certain people would have known that, and Kamala Harris should have been one of those. She was never straight or honest with the American people about Biden's cognitive decline, even though she benefited the most from it. Next, I'm very concerned about the Democratic Party's cooperation with big tech as far as it goes with censorship. Now, we all realize that we have some tools and technology today that are very powerful, surveillance tools that have become very, very powerful, especially since 9/11. But now with AI and the Department of Justice or the CIA or the FBI's ability to look into the lives of private citizens, I'm extremely concerned with some of the things that Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party have said about how they're going to use big tech. And we saw that very, very clearly, especially during the time of COVID, in which case the Biden administration was making certain demands of Facebook, the most recent of which Mark Zuckerberg very clearly admitted in a public letter how much cooperation they had with the federal government. Basically ceding to the government's demands of information. And I have every reason to believe that Kamala Harris would press that to the nth degree if she had the power to do so. In fact, we've seen 3 examples of this just recently during the time of the election. Alexa of Amazon recently, if you were to ask why one should vote for Trump, it would say that it can't possibly give that kind of information because it's non-political. But if you were asked the same question of Kamala Harris, it would give you a number of reasons why Kamala Harris would be an excellent candidate. Google, too, recently, if you were to Google President Trump, but I'm not advocating for President Trump here. In fact, I'm not even telling you who to vote for, other than I'm advocating clearly against Kamala Harris. Even Google, if you were to Google something about Trump or Trump rallies, you would only get information about Kamala Harris rallies at the top of your screen. Facebook, too, recently labeled the pictures of Donald Trump after the assassination attempt as misinformation and tried to de-platform or de-view or de-rank, I guess is the term, the number of times that image would be shown on Facebook. I think that a Kamala Harris administration would easily lean into and press into big tech to be doing more surveillance and certainly more censorship to the extent that it was able. Next, border security has been an absolute travesty during the Biden-Harris administration. Now, there has been some attempt on Kamala Harris's part to differentiate herself from Biden himself. But let's remember that Kamala Harris was, in fact, the border czar as appointed by Biden. And there's no question that the border has been one of the worst kept secrets, that it's essentially an open border now for years. We have had thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, in fact, even millions of people coming into this country illegally during the course of the Biden administration. In fact, I want to show you a chart from the Wall Street Journal here. Look at this. Look at the peak during the Biden administration. These numbers go up not quite infinitely, but certainly at an exponential rate as compared to the Trump administration or even Obama or George W. Bush before. This has been one of the greatest dangers and threats to our national security, and I'll say more about the border as we go on through this video. But next, we should highlight the dangerous nature of the COVID policies that were undertaken during the Biden-Harris administration. I think a lot of us remember the forced inoculations of our troops in the military. We saw a number of things like this. There seemed to be only one thing that the government was recommending, in fact, in some ways even strong-arming citizens to do, and that was to get the shot of the vaccine. We all know that was the only thing. Never wanted to talk about ivermectin, never wanted to talk about vitamin C, never wanted to talk about getting vitamin D, never wanted to talk about exercise. It was a one-way street with one-way traffic, and that was to the vaccination. And I think we all realize that's because of the unbelievable amount of wealth in big pharma. And so government pressed that very hard. And I have every reason to be skeptical and concerned about the government's clear overreach as it relates to COVID policy. Should there be another legitimate widespread pandemic as there was in 2020, 2021, I have no doubt that a Kamala Harris administration would overreach again as far as government's big arm and big thumb to press their thumb on the scale and try to manipulate its own citizenry. I think that's dreadful and even terrifying. Next, the debates. Kamala Harris has been very reticent to take up any kind of debate with Donald Trump during this election cycle. In fact, the only thing that we've seen is that Kamala Harris is essentially trying to mimic and recapitulate what Biden did during his campaign. Now, I think we all remember 4 years ago, Biden was the closet candidate. He was the basement candidate who barely made any public appearances. He barely made any public interviews. He rarely ever sparred with the press. And even when he did, the press gave him softball questions. Kamala Harris, in my view, has already lost the debate, even though it's supposed to take place next week. Perhaps whenever you're watching this video, maybe it's already taken place. But her unwillingness to engage in several of the debates, including the scheduled Fox debate, in my view, it portrays and it betrays an intellectual cowardice to actually confront Donald Trump as it relates to policy itself. I find that any candidate that is not willing to engage in rigorous debate is probably not a candidate that's qualified to be the president of the United States of America. Next, I am extremely concerned with Kamala Harris as it relates to DEI policies, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, one could reasonably argue that she is the DEI candidate. In fact, it was President Biden himself who said that the reason why he chose her for vice president is because he intentionally wanted to have a black woman in terms of that overlapping intersectionality. But I believe that DEI is actually a form of reverse racism. I think since Martin Luther King Jr., we should, for the most part, not consider race or skin color at all as it relates to job qualification. If it would be up to me, I would say that our society would be much better if we had a strict meritocracy, that people got jobs, people gained positions, people were elected to offices, people got scholarships, university admittance because they were qualified for those particular things, not because they were a participant in some immutable social demographic group related to race or color or gender or anything else like that. I think our society would do much better to move back to a strict meritocracy rather than to lean into DEI policies. And I have a dreadful feeling that Kamala Harris would only exacerbate what I think is a threat to the health of our nation in terms of our unity as a people. I think DEI policies essentially exacerbate differences between people along immutable lines, namely race, which honestly should be one of the least concerns. We should probably look more at a person's heart and their qualifications rather than their skin color. Next, the economy in general has been an absolute disaster under the Biden-Harris administration. Interestingly, this was called by Biden himself Bidenomics. We have not heard that term very much from Kamala Harris, of course, as she's trying to distance herself, broadly speaking, from the economy. Of course, in the process of inflation or the experience of inflation has been absolutely dreadful. And if you've bought a bag of groceries or a cart of groceries, you already know that it's becoming increasingly difficult for average people to do things like get an apartment or buy a new car, much less buy a new home. It's true probably that stocks have done well enough over this time, but as for the average person, their pocketbook has been hit very hard, at least in comparison with the Trump administration previously. Next, Kamala Harris's energy policy, in my view, is a total disaster. I would not be in favor of anything even remotely like the Green New Deal. In my view, we should use as many natural resources as we have here in this nation, including oil, including natural gas, including fracking. I think that we would be best to aim back to try to obtain energy independence in as much as we're able to do so. And I'm afraid that Kamala Harris's policies would only drag us further into a recession. It would further exacerbate inflation, and our energy independence would get further and further from actually obtaining in reality. I think this would be a disaster for common people, blue-collar people who are trying to put gas in the car or heat their homes or cool their houses if they live in warmer climates. I think a Kamala Harris policy would be absolutely miserable as it relates to energy. Next, because of her inability and Biden's inability to control the border, this great humanitarian disaster that our border has become, we now have an uncontainable fentanyl problem here in the United States of America. Illegal drugs being smuggled across our border. These are certain drugs that are so dangerous they can literally kill you just ingesting them even one time. Other drugs are certainly bad enough and dangerous enough, but fentanyl is a unique danger in and of itself, and it's only been made worse to a factor of X because of the open border policy that this administration has seen. Immigration, along this theme, has driven costs up tremendously for practically every city. The costs of medical care, the costs of our schools, the amounts of social services that we are providing to those who have come into this country illegally is a staggering cost. And many cities are struggling because of their inability to simply care for, at a humanitarian level, the thousands, the millions of people that have come across our border. And if this nation wants to do anything in its own interest, and at this point I'm not even sure that that's a concern under a Democratic or a Harris administration, that this nation wants to act in its own best interests, we would certainly need to control the borders in order to bring down these staggering costs of an uncontrolled border policy. Inflation, let me just give you a couple of examples. Have you bought a bag of beef jerky lately? Beef jerky used to be, $6 for a bag? It's over $20 for a bag of beef jerky. Let me give you another example. We needed to buy a new dryer the other day for our particular household, and I did a Google search of the average cost of a dryer back in 2020, and the average cost was somewhere between $300 and $600, right? Now, you don't want anything to break down in your house because obviously these kinds of costs, they can really hurt a family that's just trying to make do and get by. $300 on the low end, $600 on the high end if you want all the technology. Now go try to buy a dryer like my wife and I just had to do the other day. It's going to cost you between $600 and $1,200. So the lowest scale of dryer is now more expensive than the best dryer back in 2020. And the best dryers are going to be something like the cost of a kind of a cheap used car, believe it or not. It's absolutely extraordinary. And everything the Biden-Harris administration has done to drive up costs to soaring levels has been absolutely outrageous. And personally, I can't stand for that. I think it's wrong in every possible way. Kamala Harris's unwillingness next to sit down for real interviews. Now, we've seen this from the Democratic Party for years. Biden refused to subject himself to a real interview with actual questions. You probably remember as well as I do that whenever Biden did do press interviews, which was very, very rare, he would call on particular media persons and he would even know them by name and with a card in his hand. And very often the question was written on the card. If you haven't seen this, well, it's because he didn't do many interviews in the first place. But I have no doubt that the Democratic Party has seen the success of the strategy, the hide the candidate strategy, and they're going to run with this throughout the election itself. With Harris, I don't think she's going to subject herself to any real interviews. The interview that she did just a couple of days ago, a week ago or so with Dana Bash, was all softball questions, no pressing questions, no hard questions. No counter challenges, no calling her on the facts. If she does any real interviews, it's always going to be with a sympathetic press who will refuse to press her on any issues. Exactly the opposite of what they did with Trump. Remember when Trump was president, they would press him. They would go for these hour-plus long engagements. I love it, and I think that it's actually a good thing when the press has somewhat of an adversarial relationship with those people that are in power. But in as much as the press is in cahoots with the people in power, then we end up being some sort of banana republic, or worse, some sort of communist regime in which the media is essentially working for those who are in power. I don't think that's going to change if Kamala Harris gets into power. Lawfare is the idea that you attack your political opponents with a number of lawsuits that are so overwhelming that the candidate just kind of caves to the pressure or refuses to run in the first place. That's exactly what we're seeing out of the Democratic Party. They've clearly done this to Donald Trump, who is the leading opponent candidate for the Republican Party. They've tried to sue him so many times in so many states. They're trying to crush him financially. And again, look, I'm not a Trump apologist. I'm not a Trump defender. You can look on my channel for videos that are defending Donald Trump, and you won't find any. But I do think that this new movement to try to crush your political opponents with these outrageous lawsuits is a disaster for our nation. And I'm concerned that Kamala Harris would continue to do this. She would use the DOJ to the best of her advantage, and she would try to crush political opponents. Why do I think she would do that? Because she's already doing that. The Democratic Party is already doing that. Next, I feel, and I believe that I have strong foundation to believe this, that Kamala Harris's worldview is fundamentally Marxist, and that Marxism works its way out as it relates to her critical race theory agenda. Now, Marxism is essentially the division of a society in terms of the haves or the have-nots, usually casted in the form of the oppressor and the oppressed. Now, under the original kind of Marxism, that was an economic oppressor and an economic oppressor and economic oppressed. But what the new Marxists have done is they have turned that into a racial divide. And that's why you see this kind of constant gaslighting about race relations. I don't think Kamala Harris would do anything to actually improve race relations in the United States of America. If anything, it would serve to further divide and to try to stratify and to try to create an adversarial and hostile relationship between the races. And I think that's absolutely despicable. Again, I would think that Martin Luther King Jr., of whom I don't agree with everything, his lifestyle, things like that, but I think he had it right when he talked about searching for the content of the heart and striving for real racial unity in the United States of America. But the critical race theory Marxists want anything but real unity. And in fact, they're trying to stratify and to polarize race relationships. And we see her pressing almost every issue and turning it into a racial one. And if that, of course, when carried out writ large, is a disaster for any nation. Next, her policies. Where are her policies? Where have you ever seen a candidate for the highest office in the land in which you can't go and find the document that actually defines what she believes in? We don't know because she keeps flip-flopping on everything. Is she for or against plastic straws? Well, we don't know. Is she for or against fracking? Well, apparently it's this. It used to be that. Is she for or against a tighter border? Well, she says she's for a tighter border, but everything she's ever done suggests exactly the opposite. The only policy that we know for sure that Kamala Harris is for is abortion. That's the one thing that she seems to absolutely love and adore. It's the one thing that she seems to be willing to defend. Everything else is pure guesswork at this point. She will not put actual documentation on her website so that citizens can go and study her beliefs. So what do we have to do? We have to try to make ourselves informed by watching videos like this, in which we discern what a candidate believes by the actions that they have taken. And so the general rule is, if you can't find out what a person's motive is expressly, you look at their actions and you try to discern and infer their motive, from what they've actually done. Okay, so it's hard to know what she believes other than making inferences from her track record. And unfortunately, her track record for the last 4 years is absolutely miserable. Next. As I've already stated, I think that the Kamala Harris administration will do everything possible to make racial relations worse. How do I know that? Well, look at what she did during the race riots of 2020. The BLM race riots were gaslit by the Democrats, and especially Kamala Harris, who supported she supported fundraisers to actually even get people out of jail and to have charges reduced of those who were accused and, in fact, very liable of crimes during those race riots. I don't have any sort of feeling or comfort that racial relationships are going to get any better in the next 4 years if Kamala Harris is president than they are right now. And unfortunately, I think where they are right now is about as bad as they have been in a very, very long time. Next, Kamala Harris would seem to be, as well as the rest of the Democratic Party, very much against the SAVE Act. Now, what is the SAVE Act? Well, the SAVE Act is not a current policy, but it's a proposed policy in which we would strengthen voting for United States citizens. United States citizens. It would seem to make sense, wouldn't it, that you'd have to be a citizen of this country in order to vote? Well, believe it or not, that is a divisive issue. The Republicans would argue for something like the SAVE Act, in which you actually have to be a citizen of this nation to vote in our elections. The Democrats are moving exactly in the opposite direction. Of course, they're accusing this of being something that's racist. Of course, they're accusing this of something that's going to be against those whose English is poor, or those of other colors or other ethnicities. It has nothing to do with that. The SAVE Act is only to secure the fact that citizens alone should be voting. If you believe anything else than that, then that is such an extremely radical position that it's almost incomprehensible at this point. I don't think Kamala Harris will do anything to ensure that the SAVE Act is put into place and therefore that our elections would actually become secure. Again, if you don't believe that only citizens should be voting, I don't know what else to say at this point. Our nation is so divided, it's almost unreasonably, unconscionably so. Speaking of complete irrationality, Biden, on his way out the door in his most recent speeches, he hasn't given any sort of speech or public address in weeks now. He's been on vacation essentially since he was foisted out after the debate. I believe he gave one or two public talks or announcements since then. Not really. The one thing that he did say is that he believes the Supreme Court should be completely reshuffled. Why is that? Well, because in recent years, the Supreme Court has been making certain decisions that the Democratic Party does not like. And so what are they going to do? They're going to try to shake it up. They're going to try to stack the court. They're going to try to pack the court. They're going to try to readjust the court. They're going to try to rip people off of the court. It's almost unbelievable that anybody would actually make that proposal, but here we are, it's 2024, and we are in fact in an election cycle. Next, the Biden-Harris administration wants a redefinition of Title IX as it relates to gender. That's right. Boys and girls are now being redefined. Of course, this comes under some sort of rubric of equal rights or something like that, some sort of theory of intersectionality. But unfortunately, this is extremely concerning because I believe it's going to be the end of girls' sports. Once we begin to allow actual biological males to compete in girls' sports, we've essentially eliminated the category of girls' sports. The Biden-Harris administration seems to be in favor of that. And if Harris is elected, I think this is going to continue to be pressed. And the very moorings, the very fabric of our society, the very definition of sex in general, male and female, is going to continue to be blurred, and intentionally so. I think that's detrimental to society at large and a very scary thing. Not only that, but as it relates to transgenderism, there doesn't seem to be any limit to the sanity of Harris's view on this matter, much less the Democratic Party's view on this matter. It certainly seems that they would want to eliminate parental notification, parental rights. Look at some of the things that are happening in California. Look at some of the legislation that's happening there. It seems like they want surgeries, top surgeries, bottom surgeries, not only to be available, not only to be legal, but probably paid for, of course, by U.S. tax dollars. They certainly want certain drugs and medications which will stop or inhibit puberty from taking place to be available to children. In my view, this is absolutely dangerous, and it's just it's an earthquake of our society as we are literally struggling to be able to even define what it means to be human, much less male or female anymore. I think a Kamala Harris administration would only exacerbate that very issue. Next, the Trump assassination attempt. Now, again, I'm not a Trump apologist. You can vote for whoever you want to vote for. That's fine with me. But isn't it amazing and even shocking how this startling event, which literally just took place weeks ago and happened to take place here in my hometown, here in Butler in Western Pennsylvania. Isn't it amazing how the media is no longer talking about this? It's been brushed under the rug. There should be full-scale investigations. Where are the investigations? What do we even know about the Trump shooter at this point? Barely anything. His body was cremated just hours or days after the assassination attempt took place. We've learned so little from Secret Service. We've learned so little from the FBI or the CIA. We know virtually nothing about what happened in Butler at the rally when an assassination attempt was made on Trump's life. And if Harris takes power, I doubt we'll ever find any sort of facts, the real facts out about this. I think it's going to be something like the JFK assassination, in which the real documentation, the real facts are buried from public discourse for years and for years and for decades, if they ever come out at all. I don't think we're going to find out the truth about what really happened in Butler, Pennsylvania under a Harris administration. Next, I think that if Harris becomes the president, we are going to find ourselves in another forever war with Ukraine. Now, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, my sympathies were for the Ukrainian people. Obviously, nobody likes war. Maybe I should correct myself. Some people do advocate for war. Some people love war, but I'm not one of those people. I don't love war. I hate war. I think it's brutal and violent, and I would like to find an end to these kinds of conflicts. And it seems to be that this is driven by money, by the military-industrial complex. I see no end in sight, and in fact, I think we're closer to World War III than we ever have been before. Were my sympathies for the Ukrainian people when Russia invaded? Yes, they certainly were at first. I know some people in Ukraine, love and care for some people in Ukraine very dearly. But this is something of a proxy war now, with the United States constantly funding the Ukrainian side of the war. And we are certainly in the most dangerous position. And I think I would be absolutely terrified about our future prospects if Kamala Harris was the president of the United States of America. More to that same point, I don't believe that Kamala Harris is a rightly elected Democratic national nominee from the Democratic Party, as she was essentially installed and crowned with not a single vote that ever took place for her. As we know, Biden is the one who actually won the elections during the preliminary processes. Kamala Harris was a disaster in 2020 when she tried to run for president herself. She was absolutely undone by Tulsi Gabbard in one of the debates, and she sank in the polls and she never recovered. And in fact, as Biden himself said, she was chosen for vice president because she was black and because she was a woman, but she does not have what I think to be the mandate of the people. There is not really a strong groundswell of support for her, and never really has been until in the Democratic Party, even until she was seen to be the savior of the quagmire with Biden's mental competency collapse. Some have believed that collapse is long time in the making. Others seem to act as though it were much more recent, as though it suddenly came on at the Trump-Biden debate of recent months. But I suspect that most people simply won't care that she did not win any sort of primary process and will simply vote for her in the national election. I'm extremely concerned with the violence that we see in our cities today. Almost every single big city in the United States of America is run by the Democrats. From San Francisco to Chicago to New York City to Philadelphia, every city has become a dangerous hotbed of gun violence and other forms of violence. And if you think it's dangerous and violent now, just wait until these trends of gangs coming in from South America, in Central America, wait till they get settled and begin new gang wars, new territorial violence, new shootings, new street rivalries. Our nation, the very fabric of our big cities, is already fracturing at the seams, and I can't even imagine, I shudder to imagine what's going to become of our big cities under a Harris administration. I'm extremely concerned for Second Amendment rights. I believe, judging on what Kamala Harris has said about firearms and her desire to confiscate them through some sort of a mandatory buyback program, I'm extremely concerned about our Second Amendment rights, and I would be one of those citizens who demands and insists upon the rights for citizens to bear arms. Not because our forefounders wanted them for hunting or recreational purposes, but if you read the Constitution itself, if you understand the original framing of the Constitution, you know why the Second Amendment is in place. And I have a feeling that an authoritarian, technocratic tyranny under something like the modern Democratic Party would make every effort to confiscate or at least scale back citizens' rights to bear arms. And I think that's unconscionable, and I would not be for that. And finally, then, I think that the Harris administration would do everything within their reasonable power to try to squelch First Amendment rights to actually speak one's voice. In conclusion, I'm very thankful that I have the freedom, at least as it is right now, to make and to post a video like this. Even despite my position as a pastor, I'm glad that I can speak freely as a citizen for myself on behalf of my own beliefs. And again, everything in this video is only representing my own beliefs on these matters and my freedom as a citizen to share what I truly believe. I hope you savor and treasure that particular right that you have in the United States of America as it currently exists, because I don't know how much longer that right will persist into the future. Thank you so much for watching this video. I do love you lots, and we'll talk to you later.